Welcome to the Contact Center Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host, and today we've got a very special guest on with Brie Clements. And the reason why I say very special guest is because you have transitioned to a place in your career and in your company where we all aspire to get to. A lot of us in the customer support area, we feel like a support department. We don't feel like that we're recognized for our direct contributions to all the other departments and growth in the business. And you've achieved that. And I think a part of it is because you've got not only a framework that you've really implemented, you also have a background in sales and sales enablement that I think has helped a lot. And so we're going to pick your brain a bit today on how you've done this. But before we do that, I would love to give you a chance to explain a little bit more about your background and actually how your years as a yoga instructor helps you in customer support. How's that for an introduction?
Thanks so much, Steve. And happy to give a little bit more context. So a few key areas that I'd love to highlight today are around accountability, something I pride myself in, and my team holds themselves accountable as well as myself. And that's really helped deliver outcomes when we're seeking to drive change across the business. And it's something that I always ask my team to check me on. Am I holding myself accountable in the situation before we go run and hold others accountable? And then your comment about yoga instructing. So I've been practicing and teaching yoga for more than 15 years. And how that translates back to my day-to-day is leading with empathy and understanding where each person is at. A lot of times in support, we see people at their worst and at their most frustrated or stressed. So coming in, being even keeled and calm in those situations, but also teaching the team little simple tricks, right? So taking a few deep breaths. When you do have that escalated person on the phone, can definitely reset your mind, but also allow you to lead with maybe a different approach too.
Well, I want to get right into the conversation. I realize I forgot to mention that you are the Senior Director of Customer Service and Support at The Record. So here's the thing. I wanted to start off with a big question. Transforming support from being perceived as a cost center, something that needs to be contained, right? That we have to have it. We're going to have people that have questions and need help, to a revenue generator in the business. That's a very, very different perspective for the C-suite to have. So what I'd love to do is, how did you make that transition? Or how do you want to start us down the path to explain or understand what you did?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started in support, the perception of support internally and externally was very poor. So internally, people just didn't trust the support department as a whole. And that definitely translated over to our customers. And customers actually didn't want to engage with us at all. They didn't want to meet with us. They didn't want to submit issues because in the past, those issues just wouldn't get resolved. So the first step in rebuilding that relationship was getting the internal support. So that way we could ultimately convey that externally to our customers and rebuild those relationships. And so, like I had mentioned in my intro, by being accountable, right, and making sure we're going to do something, we actually do it, and then delivering a lot of really quick wins initially within the first 30 days of me stepping into that role, and then making sure we had the right team members in place to be able to position support to continue to grow. And so one of the first exercises that we did was start to build out this framework around understanding what are the technical needs across the team, what are soft skills that the team needs to be able to have, and then how can we apply that to each person's individual personal development growth plan so that way they can continue to grow across support. And so after things were stabilized, which took a little bit of time, and started to rebuild those relationships with customers, then we were able to spend more time focusing internally in tandem, training the team and upskilling them on those areas. So that framework was really instrumental early on to be able to identify what are knowledge gaps across the team, but then also making sure we have the right resource for the right problem. When we first started in support, everybody was doing everything and there wasn't really anybody specialized in anything.
So let me ask this. I love the way that you answer that question. Well, in order to be perceived differently by executive management, first we got to get our house in order, right? And we got to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing and delivering the customer support with excellence. So I'd love to have you spend just a little bit more time on what you changed and explain a little bit more about that framework and then transition into, how do we then change this perception? But so you mentioned the framework and you mentioned some really important things in there, but I want to get a little bit more depth in there in terms of what specifically you were trying to accomplish and realigning, different roles and skill sets and things like that. If you wouldn't mind taking us a little bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we have our support organization structured is we have a service desk or a help desk, right? And they triage all incoming inquiries. So they do need to know a little bit about everything just to make sure they're gathering the right information and then they can triage it appropriately. And then we have a cloud services team and a service engineering team. And the service engineering team focuses on our on-premise software and then our hardware. And then cloud services focuses on our cloud-based solution. And so that was the first piece, was making sure that we had a technical understanding mapped out of, okay, what types of problems might somebody come to us and what questions we need to ask. So that's where we developed simple things like checklists, scripts, so that way that help desk team was properly triaging things so it could get to the right place with the right resource in a timely fashion. And then from there, that's where we started to understand the matrix and building out that skills matrix. So the first thing we did is ask each individual, assess yourself. Where do you think you're at? And then we had the manager independently assess that person. And then we had them come together and have a conversation and then align on where they're actually at. Because a lot of times when we're doing a self-assessment, we might be too critical of ourselves one way or the other, right? And it's hard for us to actually see that true placement. And then sometimes the manager doesn't have all the context of different scenarios that person might be exposed to. So we found that to be a really helpful exercise. And we did that outside of our typical performance reviews because we wanted to be building this matrix independent of their past or kind of current performance indicators. And so that's where it started to allow us to think about support, not just from like this reactive state, but a lot of technical and customer success support teams live in, to being more proactive. So some of the proactive pieces we started to work through are, what are some trainings and workshops that we can have of these gaps that we know that we have? But then what are services that we can provide to customers to be proactive in their environment? And these services are things that we already had been kind of offering, but we hadn't really been promoting them to customers. And so one of the services that we do with our court customers is, think of it like a home inspection. So we'll go in, proactively check all of the hardware, the software, make sure there's no problems before a court starts. And we'll do that on a cadence basis. So that way, when they enter the room, they know they're not going to have any issues with capturing the official record versus in the past, right? We were just relying on them using the system and then reporting an issue to us. So that has been pivotal in some of our very large enterprise customer environments where we're managing 400 plus courtrooms.
Wow. So I have to ask you, because I think this is a massive benefit that, if you agree, I want you to underscore a little bit, is when you started to assess the skill set of the team and you did it, but you asked them to do it as well. How did they feel about that process, right? Like, you bringing them in and feeling like they have some ownership, they have some say in this whole process that allows them to be more proactive, because we all want to be more proactive. We all have a list of things that if we had time to do, we'd want to do them. This feels to me like something that just empowers the employee. Is that like a good assessment of what happened? And you tell me.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. So one of the first things that I did when I first started in this new department, since I had come from the sales team, was just do a needs analysis and really like a discovery with the support team, right? And just understanding what are their pain points, what are they spending a lot of time on. And the one thing that was consistently coming up from everybody that I talked to was training. They just felt like they weren't getting enough information and then support from the rest of the business. And so that's why that matrix is so important, to map that out to understand what do they actually need training on, right? Because if I would have just asked everybody, what do you want training on? Probably would have gotten 101 different requests and could have spent a lot of time going down different rabbit holes. And it would have been harder to measure if that would have actually been effective and what the team really needed.
So how does that impact their morale, their retention? Like, did you see a lift? Because we all know overall in business, the more engaged employees are, the more engaged customers are, the more revenue that we make, we grow as a business. Like in terms of like engagement of your team, what kind of an impact did this make?
Absolutely. So there was kind of two sides of the same coin. So we had some people actually use this as a promotion path. And that was really helpful because then we were able to identify quickly what they were doing well. It gave other people who weren't really sure of they wanted to stay in support or not, if they were even in the right role. And for some people, we identified just based off of their kind of self-assessment, they're not really in the right role. And that's so important to identify early. So that way we can either place them in another area of the business or help them identify another opportunity outside of our organization. And then for people who are kind of in the middle, right, who were not promoted, but they were like, no, I'm still interested in this, gave them a really clear growth path of what they needed to do to keep developing. And without that, we didn't really know how to keep pushing themselves other than, maybe I'll take this certification and that might help me, but they couldn't have that kind of direct correlation back to their day to day.
All right. So now I want to transition to that's getting your own house in order, right? But that doesn't talk about how do we change perceptions of a cost center to a revenue generator. So I'd love to kind of transition over and start talking about how did you make that transformation?
Yes. So now that we've gotten everything stabilized, we have that matrix worked out, that allowed us to resolve issues faster. So for that reactive support, we're able to get the right resource to the right person at the right time. And in turn, that gave up some more capacity on the rest of the team, right? So instead of just being in this cycle where we're stuck running, we're able to actually pause and plan and use a portion of the team's time to conduct those proactive services in courtrooms and identify issues before they happened. And that we are able to charge as a service that's an annual reoccurring revenue line item, which is huge for SaaS, but then also start to have the support team directly contribute back to that revenue other than just kind of being seen as that cost. And then as another outcome, the team's also been able to help on project related work with our operations team because they have that additional capacity. And so we're also able to contribute in that way. But taking a step back, because we've built those stronger relationships with our customers, we started fixing issues faster. Customers started leaning in and asking us, what else is new for the record? Or should I explore this new cloud product your sales team keeps telling us about, right? So they started to treat us more like an advisor or consultant rather than just somebody they call when something's broken and they want something fixed. And so that was really helpful to be able to start to pivot those relationships and start to give leads to the sales team as a result of some type of issue stemming up in their courtroom.
We all know that we have a tremendous capacity to impact cross sell and upsell. And I think it was a study by Forrester that said 73% of B2B new annual revenue should come from existing clients, right? So we chase new logos and we have to, or we have to bring in new businesses. But our ability to create additional revenue from existing clientele. And what I'm hearing the story is you're so well positioned to do that, right? Because you've created this advisory kind of a role where they are leaning in and asking you. That's incredible. You also, did I hear right that you actually created a new service line that you're now selling?
Yeah, so it's something we had, but we didn't really promote it or push it a ton with customers just because in the past, the team didn't have capacity to actually deliver that service. And so it wasn't something they wanted to go out and kind of broadcast, right? And because we're able to make that switch, then the team did get more capacity and understand the value. And I think that's another piece is a lot of times the team doesn't understand how the contracts work or the contractual value. or even how some of the inner workings of the finances work on the back end of the business. And so that was something else that a lot of the team has now seen. What does a contract look like for support? What are our terms? How does all that's work? Because that was another piece we stabilized and standardized across our customers. When I first came in, that was a mess. It was each customer basically had a different version of our contract. And so it was really hard to manage and deliver a service consistently. And giving the team exposure to that allowed them to also understand the importance that they're not just here to fix a problem. We're going to turn it into how can we get an opportunity or a sales deal out of this interaction as well.
So there's like three parts of what you're saying here, but it's all fundamental to you had to free up time for them to be proactive, right? Without doing that, you wouldn't have been able to lean into these parts of your contract where you could expand the relationship, the cross-selling, the upselling, working with other departments, like you mentioned, operations, right? All of that wasn't happening if you were just in the throes in your team and department of just addressing questions and upset, people that were calling in, right? You had to make that transformation first before you could do all of this. I have to ask you, you've got a sales enablement background. How does this play into this? Revenue generating and just kind of your mindset and how you approach this. Because you have that background, how did that help? How did that aid in what you're doing now?
Yeah, there's a couple different areas. So the first area was just the overall mindset. Every interaction that we had with a customer, I saw it as an opportunity to solve a problem for them, but turn that problem into an opportunity to discuss something else that was either new that we had or something they didn't have today, but do it in a really delicate way. So that way you're actually getting at whatever was causing them pain. So as an example of that, we have a big court customer in Arizona, and one of their judges is hard of hearing. And we have a new product that allows you to have speech to text in the courtroom live in real time. And we gave that to them as a pilot because that judge kept saying, oh, I want the speaker tilted. Can you turn up the volume in the room? But it wasn't really getting at the problem, which was they couldn't actually understand what was going on in the courtroom. And for a judge, you're one of the most critical players in the courtroom, right? You want to make sure they're going to be making the decision that they're able to hear everything. And a lot of judges are, getting older, and some of them are having a harder time accepting that. And so we saw that as an opportunity. Well, let's have them pilot one of our cloud solutions. And then it solves their immediate problem, right, of not being able to hear because they can read a live transcript in the room. But it also gives them exposure because now that judge can share their experience with other judges across the court system, then we can continue to expand the opportunity.
I'm seeing a very big connection now to the upskilling that you talked about earlier, right? Because having an agent that can not only have the skills to and the compassion to really listen and understand and solve the problem at hand, but to see a challenge that has an opportunity to cross-sell and upsell at the same time, that's not a low-level agent kind of responsibility or task. So is it back to your training? Is it back to finding the right kind of people to fill that kind of a role? How do you make sure you have the team members that can be trained but handle that kind of responsibility?
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. So one of the books I've recently shared with the support team was Never Split the Difference. And so using some of the techniques in there around mirroring, right? So when you're on the call and you're trying to build trust and immediately de-escalate the situation, using that as a quick tactic by simply repeating the last few words that they said or paraphrasing the statement. And then we also talk about some other soft skills like tone of voice. And so playing into those soft skills, also with that understanding of, okay, we're all one big team at the end of the day. Just because we're here to solve the problem doesn't necessarily mean that we only want to stay focused on that. And so that's where that sales enablement piece kind of came into play of, okay, we're going to see every interaction as that opportunity to talk about what are other things that we can do to offer to help when it makes sense, right? Because we don't want to do that when it doesn't make sense. If somebody's truly upset and we just need to fix the problem and they only have 2 minutes, we know that's not the time to bring it up. But if it's somebody that we have that ongoing relationship with, or it is something like that example I gave, where we can find that immediate way to solve that problem with that upsell opportunity, that's where that opportunity to expose the team to how do you navigate those situations. So something I do as well as my managers is we do one-on-one coaching sessions. So we'll listen to some of the calls that are recorded with the team. We'll also review cases with them. So we do a daily and weekly case review. And then we talk about those examples and then we'll share those stories with the team. So that way everybody can keep learning from each other.
So I have to believe that you have some KPIs that you're tracking that are non-traditional for a support team, right? Like, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think then those KPIs translated to the C-suite is probably one of the biggest parts of this story. But you tell me.
Yes. Well, some of the things that we were tracking initially, right, and this was just a baseline of things everybody should be tracking were, our response time, resolution time, things that are in our service level agreement. But then beyond that, we wanted to understand how are we actually impacting the customer's business? So one report that we do for our customers is courtroom utilization. And that's really important for them because it allows them to determine if they should build new courtrooms, if those courtrooms can be repurposed. They don't really have another source where they can get that information from other than from our company. And so that's a metric that's huge for them to be able to see what is that overall percentage and then tie that back to the number of issues that they're having in a courtroom to give them really a more holistic picture of what's going on. So if it's courtroom that's highly utilized, when there's a higher amount of support tickets, that kind of correlation can make sense. But then also revisit and give an upsell opportunity of, okay, if it's an older courtroom and it's highly utilized and they're having a lot of support issues, then that could tell that court, oh, maybe we need to spend some more money and invest in rebuilding this courtroom or re-outfitting it with new software and hardware so we can see that business outcome. So that's just one example of kind of a non-traditional metric. So when we're thinking about that, that correlates back to churn, right? Because if it's some of our large enterprise customers we're providing those insights to, that helps reduce that. But then also thinking about things like, okay, how many times is that customer now going to be willing to give a referral to other court systems as a result of that? And so while these things are harder to track and they're not traditional, it's something that's been a really good gauge for us to allow what I kind of call that trust accelerator when they're trying to build those relationships with customers quickly to be able to have a good sense of how crucial is our software and our solution back to their business.
I love that, the idea of this trust accelerator. There's actually a lot that's come out that just selling organizations are the bottom of the totem pole for trust. Most B2B buyers are waiting longer and longer and longer and longer to want to even talk to us. I think the LinkedIn Edelman Trust Barometer that came out recently said that 61% of the respondents thought that we were being intentionally misleading. So this idea of building trust and having it as a core part of what you're doing is so needed. I mean, our brands are trust marks, right? We learned that early on in our careers. So I just wanted to underscore that when you said that, it's so important. You're doing there's so many pieces of the puzzle that you're putting together here that I just wanted to underscore that. I want to make sure that I have a chance to ask this question. What haven't I asked? What's important, right? That you want to make sure is a part of our conversation here today.
Yeah, Steve. So I think something that often gets overlooked is what can I actually start doing to make an impact immediately? A lot of times people get caught up in you need to have this grandiose plan. I'm going to spend a lot of time building this plan out and then dedicating a lot of resources to making sure that plan actually goes according to what they predicted. And what I've learned in my time in several different teams across different SaaS organizations is it's constantly changing. The business priorities are constantly changing. So if you spend too long trying to come up with a perfect plan or the silver bullet, you're just never really going to get there. And that's why I love that matrix, right? Because it gives you that framework as a guide, but you can still be flexible in how you want to adapt it and then utilize it across the team. And it doesn't take a lot of time to put together. It's really just understanding what are the solutions that we have to offer, what are some of the soft skills, and then how does this translate back to individuals' career goals. And so I want to underscore the importance of getting started today and acting quickly so you can understand what is that impact that you want to make. Because at the end of the day, we all know that the executive leadership team is here to see the results and the outcome. They're not as worried about the plan, right? Because they just want to know, is this going to lead to the results we're looking for or not?
I love it. It actually dovetails into my last question, which I think is the most important of all. And that is, we've talked about so much, and our poor human brains can only retain about two or three things at a time. We get overloaded. If you were to have an opportunity to say, here's the one single most important thing that I want the audience to take away from our conversation today, what would that one most important takeaway be?
Yeah, that one takeaway from my perspective would be, Steve, is understanding. Do you have some type of understanding of your current state in the business today? So do you know where all of those gaps are? How do you have that documented and mapped out? And then what are you doing to address those things? And so that's something that you can do today, and just getting started with understanding where do you currently sit and then where do you want to go, right? And understanding what that future state looks like and starting to craft that vision. And that's something that a lot of times people in support don't make enough time for, is that future state. So just so caught up in kind of chasing that reactive nature of things that they don't stop to think about, okay, we're at point A, how do we actually get to point B? And how do we do it in a way that doesn't disrupt our internal team, but also our customers? Because going back to trust, if we disrupt things too much, then they might start asking questions, or you could even accidentally degrade the quality of support that you're giving if you're trying to move too quickly or in a direction that isn't in line with your customer expectations.
Well, here's what I know from our conversation today. People are going to have questions. Is it appropriate that I give out a link to your LinkedIn profile that people could reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to connect on LinkedIn. I love connecting with new faces. If you do reach out, just know that I'll probably send you a direct message and say, when can we find 15 minutes to get to know each other better? I love having that personal connection with my network.
Well, I have to tell you, the mission behind this podcast is to share different perspectives, unique insights, unique experiences of how we create success. And the fact that you've created so much success kind of beyond where a lot of us are in our companies, I just wanted to say that that's the mission of what we're trying to do, right? And we're trying to help people have a path and advocate for themselves and garner the resources and build the right teams and have the time to be proactive and do the kind of things that you're doing. And so I call that the rising tide that lifts all boats. And I think you are an amazing rising tide today in just bringing us into what you've done and how you've been successful at it. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Steve. It's been an honor and a pleasure chatting with you today. And hopefully this was helpful to the audience, and happy to discuss offline with anybody in more detail around how we actually put all of this into motion.